Hello and welcome back to Up the Villa. If you're new to our channel, make sure you are subscribing, smash the likes and get involved in the comment section down below. So we've got Villa news. Francesco Calvo has been appointed head of Aston Villa's business. Well, he's the president of Aston Villa's business operations. That's his professional title. And what we're going to do on this episode, we're going to have a little bit of a look at who Calvo is, where's he been, what's his backstory. We're also going to take a look at the job that he's done at Juventus. And we're also going to hear from a Juventus fan of what he was actually like, what he was doing there, what his job role was, and is he much of a talker or not? So that's going to be interesting to find out the insight from a Juventus fan as well. We're going to talk about PSR. We're going to talk about Calvo's job and what he's got to do. And there's one area coming up for him that is massively important. So let's get stuck into it and we'll give our thoughts. We're going to talk about PSR as well and what's going on there. We'll talk about Mbuemo, Manchester United, because they've signed, looks like they're signing him, which is mental. So we'll go into that as well. So a bit of a jam-packed one, but it's mainly about Calvo and his role and hearing from the Juventus side of what he's actually been doing there. So from the Villa point of view, we've appointed him. So Francesco joins the club from Juventus, where he's been managing director of revenue and institutional relationships. In this role, he was responsible for all revenue streams and relationships with key institutional stakeholders in football, such as FIFA, UEFA, ECA, and Serie A. Francesco has held several leadership roles over 2 spells with the Italian giant, as well as senior management positions at Barcelona and Roma. So Calvo has said, "It's a great honour for me to join this club at such an exciting time. Everyone in football knows the history of and passionate support for Aston Villa. In the past few years, we've seen this begin to be matched by success on the pitch and progress off it under the ambitious ownership of V Sports. I look forward to working with the chairman, the board, Unai Emery, and everyone at Aston Villa to continue driving this great institution forward." He succeeds Chris Heck, and Suarez has said, "We are pleased to welcome Francesco Calvo to Aston Villa. He has an outstanding track record at some of Europe's biggest clubs and brings a huge amount of experience. Our ambition is for Aston Villa to be competing at the very top level in everything that we do, both on and off the pitch. Francesco's skills, relationship, and experience will prove invaluable in making that ambition a reality." So we've heard there from Suarez and Calvo that he's actually been working in football at some of the biggest clubs in the world. Barcelona, Juventus, 2 giants within La Liga and Serie A. And I think that's really good for this role, that he's been working at elite level clubs. And we're kind of operating like one now. We are not as established as elite giants like Juventus and Barcelona, and we're striving to be on that ilk. But I think his experience of working within those 2 clubs and Roma will hold a bit of fruit for Villa. You know, he's used to working in these type of environments. He's used to working with clubs that are in Europe. He's used to sort of doing the same role at different clubs. So he's got key experience there, which I think is going to be absolutely massive for Aston Villa. So who is he? And let's try and find a little bit more about him and where he's been and what he has been doing within those clubs that he's been at. So Calvo is 46. He's relatively young for a football executive, but has already held prominent roles in Juventus, Barcelona, and Roma. Here's a summary of his career before his appointment as Aston Villa's CEO. Italian executive Calvo is set to become the new Aston Villa CEO. Well, business operations, however you want to word it. after resigning from Juventus, where he held the managing director of revenue and football development for the last 2 years. Juventus transfer expert Romano Agresti explained that Calvo was not pushed out of the club, but decided to leave the Allianz Stadium for a new challenge in the most competitive league in the world, covering a bigger role than the one that he had at Juventus. As Juventus wrote on their official website, Calvo studied business administration at University Commerciale Luigi Bocconi and obtained a master's in strategic marketing at the Profiginist Management School in 2002. He began his professional career in 2004 at the Philip Morris International, holding roles of increasing responsibility until 2011, when he was promoted to the position of Director of Event Marketing. He joined Juventus in 2011 as Commercial Director before being promoted to Chief Revenue Officer in 2014. He left the Bianconeri less than a year later, partially, as Eurosport explained, because his relationship with ex-Juventus president Andre Agnelli was not ideal. From 2015 to 18, he was at Barcelona's Chief Revenue Officer before moving to Roma, when he served a Chief Revenue Officer and Chief Operating Officer. 2022, Calvo returned to Juventus, where he worked for a few months under Agnelli before the ex-president and the entire board of directors resigned at the end of the year. During his second spell at the Allianz Stadium, Calvo first worked as chief of staff, and then from 2023, he was appointed chief football officer, reporting to the chief executive. After Cristiano Guidottoli's appointment in the first summer of 23, Calvo worked as Juventus managing director of revenue and football development. So those are his roles that he's had at Juventus, Roma, and Barcelona. So he's had varying roles. He started at Juve. He grew through the system. So he must have been doing a pretty decent job there for him to sort of keep getting promoted, etc. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hear from a Juventus fan. And I asked him a number of questions. He didn't really have a sort of massive presence. So I've asked an Italian journalist who didn't really know too much about him. So then I went to a Juventus fan who I thought would be a bit like me and have an understanding of everybody at the club. And he did. But his role was very backseat. It wasn't like he was forefront of everything. So there's not a lot of information about him. But there's one piece of information that is very, very crucial moving for Aston Villa in 2026. And you'll see the correlation once I've told you what he said. So here we've got what he said. So Calvo has been at Juve on 2 separate occasions. He's held multiple roles ranging from commercial director, chief revenue officer, chief of staff, and chief football officer. He's held roles that aren't really going to resonate with fans. The last position he held with us, however, was managing director of revenue and football development, and this did put him in the spotlight this season because finding us a sponsor was his task, and we went the entire season without getting one. And in the end, we went right back to Jeep, which was the previous sponsor, and with a smaller deal, and Keep is in the same corporate umbrella as our owners, Exor. So that was bad luck and ultimately failed there. But he did play a part in getting the books corrected and now clean and in the green last report for the first time in 5 years. So I'd say it was a mixed bag with him. Ultimately, he won't really stand out because his roles are more behind the scenes. So that's the first part. I then asked him if he was a talker and does he come out and talk about what's going on behind the scenes, and this is what he said. We didn't hear from him because of the nature of his roles. There really wasn't anything for him to speak on. The more sporting side roles usually speak. Sporting director, coach, president occasionally. So I wouldn't imagine you'll hear much. So those are his thoughts. I actually feel like we probably will hear from him because the nature of the role. I think we will hear parts from him. Or we may hear nothing. Depends which role we tend to go down. Now, why I feel like this part is important about the sponsorship side of things is because Aston Villa, after this year with Botano, we signed a 2-year deal with Botano. We cannot have gambling sponsors on our shirts. 2026 is the year that Aston Villa have to find a new front of shirt sponsor. This front of shirt sponsor has to be our biggest yet. So it's very important that the front of shirt sponsor, in my opinion, is huge. Why I feel this is important is that we've just heard here that he struggled to get a front of shirt sponsor, and he ended up going back to the front of shirt sponsor that they already had in the first place, that's part owned by their owners. So I'm not saying that this is a massive issue, but I'm just saying that one of the biggest things that is coming up for Aston Villa is our new front of shirt sponsor. And I imagine that this might be where he first gets judged on what and how good he actually is when this comes up in probably not that long. We're probably going to hear about this new front of shirt sponsor maybe early next year, maybe Feb, March, April, something like that. So it is important. Let's hear a bit of the backstory then behind the shirt sponsor that they've now got and what went on through it. And then we'll talk about why that shirt sponsor is important. And then we'll have a discussion about some of the areas that we really need to improve on and the job role that he's actually got to do at Aston Villa then. So let's just to quickly read this article then that was brought out about their shirt sponsor going back to Jeep. So Juventus and Jeep reunite in a deal, 69 million shirt sponsor deal. Visit Detroit to take up front of shirt branding inventory for domestic competitions. Italian soccer giants Juventus have named Jeep and Visit Detroit as their front of shirt sponsors as part of multi-year agreements. Contracts Jeep to pay Juventus 69 million for front of jersey branding until 2028. Automobile maker to have branding at all domestic and international competitions. Visit Detroit takes up second spot reserved for sponsors on front of shirts for domestic competitions only. Some context here. So Jeep's parent company, Stellantis, is owned by Exor, the Italian company controlled by the Agnelli family that owns Juventus. Jeep had previously been the Serie A outfit's front of shirt partner between 2012 and 2024, with the team then replacing the car maker with branding from the Save the Children Foundation this season. Juventus said it would be paid $4 million for the remainder of the 24-25 season by Jeep for branding. The club will then gain $19 million for the 25-26 campaign and then 23 for subsequent years. The Serie A's clubs are allowed to have two sponsors featured on the front of their jerseys, with the likes of Hellas Verona and Calgary among those that take that option. So there we can get a little bit of a story about how much that Jeep deal is worth. And there looked to me to be a little bit of an issue with getting that sponsor. They went back to the original one. That I don't think that's sort of allowed in the Premier League, where you can have your own. I don't know actually, because Etihad have don't they own Man City or something like that? So the part of their group and Etihad and all that business. So I'm not actually too sure about that, but whether that's actually allowed in the Premier League. So why I think it's important that we're talking about the sponsorship, etc., is actually because it's so important for Villa to grow as a club. And Chris Heck was able to get Aston Villa's front of shirt sponsor to a really good level from what we were at before. So if we take a look at what we're and where we were at before, so English top flight side Aston Villa have agreed a club record 40 million front of shirt sponsorship deal with Greek betting brand Betano. The 2-year contract will kick in from next season and is believed to be worth more than twice the current agreement Villa has had with Chinese betting firm BK8, which was at 8 million. Betano, which is one of the 2 brands that operate under parent company Kaizen Gaming, was unveiled as a global sponsor for UEFA 2024 World Championships. So we went from 8 million with BK8 to 20 million a year with Betano, which meant that the whole deal over 2 years was at 40 million. So you can see the progress that we made from 8 to 20 to 40 over 2 years. When this one comes to an end, we have to get one, in my opinion, that's far greater than 20. So the first job that he's got is to improve our revenue streams to that subsequent level, being far greater than what it currently is right now. The next part to this is the fact that what we've got to look at is who are we going to get, and where are we in the grand scheme of these football finances. And I think if we take a look at where Aston Villa sit within the whole sponsorship model of the Premier League. So here we've got everybody's sponsorship, front of shirt and sleeve sponsors. So we can see Manchester United at the top, Snapdragon, and they've got DXC, a combined sponsorship revenue of 80 million. Aston Villa in 7th. So we're behind City, Liverpool, Tottenham, Arsenal, Newcastle, and then Villa. Betano and Trade Nation at 22 million. Manchester United at 80 million. City 80. Liverpool 62. Tottenham 60. Arsenal 50. Newcastle 32. And Villa on 22. And then you go down to the bottom of the Premier League and you see Ipswich with Ed Sheeran and Halo at 5 million. So you can see we're sort of in the region with Everton 19.5, Leicester 17.5. So why this is important is that Calvo's got to come in and increase Aston Villa's commercial revenue. Sponsorship has got to go levels now. We've got to really start making ground and getting these really good sponsorship deals that can enable us to push further up this table. Now, the important thing to note with all of this is that we are a club that are growing. And because we're a club that are growing on the pitch, we're growing off it. The two cannot be separate, because you cannot just be like, we're growing on the pitch, that's fine, growing off it. The two help each other. The two don't bounce off each other. They help each other. So if we are competitive on the pitch, doing very, very well, which we are, Champions League, Europa League, trying to push the club to become on a platform and be relevant and successful, then what's going to happen is that the sponsorship deals are going to go, do you know what? We want to be on the front of Villa's shirt because they're in the Champions League, they're in Europe, they're on the big stage. Then what happens? The two combine and grow at the same time. So on-pitch Villa is very important for off-pitch Villa, because the two will grow, the sponsors will come in. What's happened at Villa, and you can see this, is because we've been on, a club that have been in the championship, we've been struggling in the Premier League for a season, and then we had a couple of seasons where we were just okay. look where you are. You're in that bracket of Everton, West Ham, Fulham, Brighton, Palace, Wolves, Bournemouth. You're in that little bracket there of competing in that bracket. But we need to push above that bracket now, and we need to really be starting to look at sponsorship deals within the bracket that we're actually competing in. This is the bracket now that we're trying to compete with these teams. We're trying to get to that level, but at the end of the day, these clubs are ahead of us. So we have to climb and grow very, very quickly. Otherwise, you are going to get left behind. And PSR is a problem, but it's only a problem because of our revenue. Aston Villa's revenue is the problem. And we can talk about PSR as well. And PSR is designed to keep the top teams at the top and to make it very difficult for clubs like Villa and Newcastle to compete with them. Because if we actually look at the revenue of Manchester United, and we're looking at Mbeumo, and we're talking like, why is Mbeumo going there, and why is Cunha going there? Like, at the end of the day, Manchester United are still they've still got pull, they've still got the pull. But when you start looking at Manchester United's actual numbers behind their revenue, and we look at this now, so we can see that the green on 2024 is at 152 million. Broadcasting is at 258. And commercial is at 360 million. So they've got there 771 million. And they've had a 3% increase on their previous year. So what happens is, even though they are bottom end Premier League, no Europe, their revenue is so high that it means that they're able to spend money and they're able to stay at the top. No matter how bad Manchester United are, they will always remain at the top. Because this model now of them having so much revenue just means that they will always be there. The problem for someone like Villa is, if we had a real bad season, it would be a disaster. And this is why I said last year that it's so important that we got Europe, because no Europe for Villa is an absolute disaster, because revenue isn't going to be there. So the revenue that comes with being in Europe is absolutely massive for Villa. We've got to close this gap, create more revenue, get more sponsorship in, more match day revenue. Because I'll show you, this is Aston Villa in 2024, 52 million for match day. That's virtually 98 million less than Manchester United. We've got commercial, 43. Manchester United, we're in the 300 million bracket. We're in the 43. So you can see here that if Villa have one bad season and don't get Europe, then the problems are there. So we've got to keep growing as a football club. And it's just so important that Calvo comes in, hits the ground running with a massive sponsorship deal. We then have all of our sleeve sponsors, our sponsorship deals on a match day, and we improve those, and everything's just got to really improve. And, we talk about PSR, and, you're looking at the other clubs and the big six, and that they have created a thing, because the Premier League audience isn't just in this country, it's overseas. It's absolutely massive. And what ends up happening is, these new fans that start supporting these teams that grow these clubs in different countries look at, say, the big six and go, they're they're the clubs, they're the only ones to follow, they're the only ones to support, and they're just able to just grow and just keep growing. So it's sort of like backs against the wall, and it's a difficult task, but I do believe that by Calvo coming in and getting this front of shirt deal done first, quick, a big one, increase that revenue, and just be creative and be really expressive. Think outside the box a little bit. I think sometimes some of our sponsorships just a bit random. Like we've got that vodka sponsorship deal, but does anybody know anything about that? Are they very relatable? Are they? Can we all relate to it on a match day? No, and I think having some of those sponsorship relationships is actually quite important. So I just really wanted to kind of talk about what his role is and what he's got to do and how he's got to improve us, because we've got to keep striving, we've got to keep growing, and on field and off field have really got to grow together at a quick rate. And I think on field, obviously, he's doing very, very well, but the off field has got to keep pushing it and growing it and just keep moving up that list, really. And just the finances have just got to keep growing. It's so important, and it's frustrating that we've got to talk about these finances and talk about football in this way, but it is the way. It's the only way. It's the only way for Villa to be able to compete. But why it's so important is we look at Villa's PSR model, revenue to wages, etc., and hopefully one day we won't have to offset the wages as much. But at the end of the day, the more money that Calvo makes for Aston Villa, the easier the job is for Villa to be able to spend money within PSR. So it's important. So I really wanted to just highlight a little bit about him, hear from a Juve fan of what he's like, what he was doing there, and then finally just get your thoughts at home. How are you feeling about him? How big a role do you think he's got? And yeah, just share your thoughts really on how you're feeling. So hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. A little bit different, talking about off field, but off field, I'm not being funny, it's just as important as on field. Up the Villa.